I just switched.
Yes, yes, I can hear you
Perfect.
now. Right. So, Adam, welcome to another episode of Founders Grit. Um, right. Usually or generally, what we do is that we start. Um, I usually ask you guys to introduce yourselves. So maybe like if you can give a bit, a, like a brief introduction about what you do, what partner does, and like maybe talk a bit about how you started on this journey.
Yep, perfect. You want me to just dive in?
Yes, yes, please do, please do.
Uh, Perfect. So yeah, I'm Adam Mahalski, co-founder and CEO of Partnered. Partnered is a sales network where you can connect your sales team with your partner sales teams to exchange customer introductions.
Mhm.
Uh, we've been building the company now for a few years. We were part of the Y Combinator Winter 21 class. The entire company kind of arose from my personal experience. I was working for a company called Branch Metrics, and I joined as an early employee to build out like their New York sales office, and got to see how impactful that these partnerships could be for the revenue organization when leveraged properly and being able to speak with other sellers within your ecosystem that have already, frankly, closed the deals that you want to close. But the problem was that there was just incredibly manual for these partnerships to be run. So yeah, started building a solution, and that has since become partnered.
Right. So how does partnered works? Like, is it like a community sort of? It's like is it like a community backed sort of a thing, or like so how generally do you guys function?
Yeah, great question. So we operate as like you can think about it as similar to LinkedIn. You can join the
Mhm.
network. The key difference with our technology versus LinkedIn is that we actually will pre-populate everything for you by just connecting your CRM. So we integrate directly with Salesforce or HubSpot,
Mhm.
and you can sign up for Partnered for free in less than 5 minutes. Once you sign up, you will then basically create all the different profiles for your sales team. So their entire book of business will just instantly create their profiles for them. And then you can connect your sales team with any of your partner sales teams that you're already working with or want to work with. And Partner will basically just build the network for each one of your sellers. So they'll be able to now see if they're trying to sell into Nike, for example, that,
Mhm.
three of their, other AEs in their network have already sold into Nike, so they can ask them for help on who to sell to, how to sell that organization, all the stuff that's going to help them, decrease their sales cycle by up to 50%.
Sounds good. So I have another question. So do you guys like work with big corporations, or do you guys like also work with like startups and small businesses, or like do you guys like cater to the entire spectrum? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. So we work with B2B SaaS sales teams anywhere from, usually Series B and beyond. Like the bulk of our clients are growth stage companies who are either approaching, going
Mhm.
public or, having just gone public. We're definitely starting to expand more into like the Fortune, 1000, Fortune
Yep.
500. So we've been seeing a lot more interest in that space, and I expect that to continue. But yeah, at the end of the day, if you're a B2B SaaS organization and you have at least one partner, you can start leveraging partner today.
Got it. Got it. Right. So when this entire COVID saga started, you guys were like still a very young company, right? So from what I've read, you guys started like somewhere in the beginning of 2019. Am I right? That is
That's
when,
correct.
right? Right. So you guys were like a pretty young company. So how did you guys? How was that? Like how has that experience been? Like were you guys remote? Or are you guys remote now?
Yeah, so we were going to be remote even prior to COVID. I think COVID kind of
Mhm.
just made that even more of a no-brainer. Um,
Yeah.
like for us, we have folks all over the United States and throughout the world at this point.
Mhm.
So we basically plan on continue like being remote for the entirety of the company. I think once we hit a certain size, we'll likely look to maybe have like regional offices.
Right.
But for the foreseeable future, I think, like the company will be 100% remote.
Right. So how's your experience been working with remote teams? Because um, for us, it's been I'd say the communication part has been a bit of a challenge because even with like hybrid work environments, you still kind of get to see people face to face. It's a bit different than being entirely like completely remote. So how has that experience been for you? What do you like? Are there any specific tools that you guys kind of use to manage your remote teams or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that, as with most things, there's pros and cons. On the pro side, I think, our teammates and what I, even tangentially from just friends, like I think the flexibility of being able to just work from anywhere is really enticing. I think that the ability to basically control your own schedule,
Yeah.
and work the hours that you want to work, in most roles is very enticing. I also think just the time in which you save on, commute, and just efficiency, is
Oh God,
definitely
yes.
a
That's
huge
that's
huge
a
benefit.
huge plus. Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing when you kind of think back on it, how much time you would spend just commuting. And I mean, that also kind of feeds into some of the cons, though. Like what I think is interesting is, you mentioned one of them is seeing your coworkers in
Yeah.
the office, and having really more of that social experience. So, or even things as simple as, on the commute, like listening to podcasts and things like that, where you can actually like leverage that time, and turn it from just like actually looking at it as just like a solely wasted time to actually more
Yeah.
beneficial by being able to kind of take advantage of the commute. So I think, I mean, I still personally believe that the pros, significantly outweigh the cons here. I think the quality of life and, the just the productivity gains that you get from remote work, are more beneficial than the cons. But I think moving forward, we'll probably see a little bit more of like a hybrid where,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
say 70% of the time you're remote, 30% of the time, you aggregate in person. I feel like that's likely where we'll net out.
Yeah, so a funny story. So I was having a conversation with like another somebody who's like very new to remote work. And so they expanded quite a lot during COVID, right? And they so like half of the team had not like met each other um
Mhm.
face to face, and like most people aren't exactly used to like having virtual meetings, and a lot of people aren't really comfortable with having their like their cameras on as well. So so when the team met for the first time in person, he was like it was complete chaos because nobody recognized the other person. So yeah, so I guess that's one dilemma that a lot of businesses have been going through. I have another question though. So with our experience, because we deal with like development teams in particular,
Mhm.
how difficult it is for a new business or a startup to set up a sales team, or like
Yeah.
is there like any particular thing that maybe like any advice I would say for the lack of a better word that maybe um you could give them, because I know like lead
Mhm.
generation and then setting up sales teams like is one of the biggest challenges that a lot of young businesses face.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that, a lot of folks think that sales is completely art, where there is a lot of science to it. I mean, there's definitely, a fair amount of art to sales, and that's, something that I could touch on afterwards. But
Mhm.
when you're thinking about sales, as particularly at the startup stage, like I think one of the most important things, frankly, is most organizations are actually too quick to hire salespeople. The particularly when you're like your pre-product market fit as a startup, you want to make sure that, ideally the founders, are the ones who are doing the sales for as long as possible. And the reason why is, the feedback loop that you get by working with customers and understanding, like intimately understanding their pain points, intimately understanding, what
Mhm.
makes them tick, and how best to position your own offering. So that's definitely one of the first things that I would recommend is like for, you basically want to be founder led from a sales perspective until it's so painful, that like you have to really start scaling. And hiring additional heads. And the reason why that's also so important is like if you can't make the sale, yourself, and if you can't, predictably sell your product, how could you expect, somebody else to come in and do it?
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
definitely exceptions to this, like I think that if somebody doesn't, or somebody on the founding team doesn't have as strong of a sales background, there may be exceptions, but at the end of the day, I would still strongly advise, that one of the founders be selling for as long as possible. um, when it comes to actually hiring a sales team, there's an entire, science behind that. Like, for example, I typically recommend, hiring 2 reps to start with, because it will help you baseline and
Mhm.
understand, like, is the salesperson working or not working, or is the process not working? Like, those are 2 fundamentally different things. And if you're only working with one salesperson, i.e., like one data point, it
Yeah.
becomes really
Yeah.
like difficult. But yeah, I'm happy to elaborate further on, other best practices, but I think those are like 2 of the ones that are really most poignant.
Yeah, please do. Please do. Because I feel like that's a question that a lot of people are going to probably have. So like
Yeah.
maybe if you can touch more on that, and maybe like also because you were saying that sales is kind of like an art, which
Yes.
is very
Yeah.
interesting. So
There's okay. Yeah, I mean, I could talk about this for hours. So I mean, one of the other things that I think is really important is, like, like, you want to basically, for those first couple reps, like, you want to make sure that you're hiring people that are a lot more generalists than they are like specialists. Specialists, and this also kind of holds true for companies as you start to scale, where from the beginning of a company, you want people who are more of like your Navy SEALs, if you will, people who can kind of come in and they can, tackle multiple different problems, versus somebody who's just like, only focused on like one
yeah,
particular segment of the
yeah,
company. The same thing holds true for salespeople, where the early salespeople, you want to be more dynamic. And the reason being is that your offering and, the different ways in which you position your product and all of the things that, you could hire down the road, somebody who's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, of like a cookie cutter sales rep,
okay,
is complete opposite of what you're looking at, like, for the early stages. At the earlier stages, you need somebody who can change direction, iterate, provide feedback back to the product team on what's working, what's not working, understand, how best to position things from a marketing perspective. Like, all of those are really, really important things to gauge for your first couple hires. Eventually what you'll do is you'll start to, understand what's not working, and, you'll be able to actually become a lot more systematic in the way in which you sell. And that's
mhm,
when you could start to put together, like, kind of guidelines on, like, here's what to do, here's what not to do, here's, like, how
yeah,
many calls it
yeah,
takes to close a deal, here's who
mhm,
you need to speak with. Like, it starts to become a lot more of a science, and that's when you can start to, once you have a much more repeatable process on that front, then you can really start to push down on the gas and, hire more reps, because, you could be confident that if you plug in 10 sales reps over here, you'll start to understand that how much revenue they're going to output and what the actual expectations are. But it's really, really important for those first couple, to make sure that they're a lot more generalists than they are specialists.
got it. If now that you've elaborated, that makes a lot of sense actually. Um, right. So another quick question. Do you think there's like a there's a right time to plug in automation into your sales funnel, or do you think that is something that you should be doing from the very beginning of the process?
Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of different schools of thought here. I think ultimately, like, every scenario is going to be unique to, like, your product, your positioning, your overall strategy for the company. Um, but I can walk you through, like, 2 different schools of thought that are kind of
Mhm.
opposing. One of them is that you should be leveraging automation, directly from the beginning, because sales is more quantitative. And if you think about it, a lot of the sales funnel is just purely numbers based. Like, if you send
Yeah.
out 10,000 emails, maybe you'll get 500 responses, and 200 of those will be favorable, and 50 of those will convert into a meeting, and then 5 of those will convert into a sale.
Mhm.
Yeah, so you can kind of think about it as, like, purely numbers. Now, that's one school of thought, in which case, if you agree with that, then you should be leveraging automation, like, as quickly as possible, because you can imagine, the more numbers that you put into the top of the funnel, the
Yeah.
better that, the results come out
Mhm.
of the at the bottom of the funnel. The other school of thought here is personalization. And I think, when you think about the prior example of just quantity, that definitely works more with like a long tail SMB type sale. If you're targeting more of the enterprise, I would argue it's probably like not the right strategy. So if you're going for larger companies and companies that are much more strategic sales, in that case, you probably want to deploy like more of an enterprise model of
Personalized
personalization.
approach. Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. That makes
Exactly,
sense.
because then you'll want to make sure that every single, there's going to be a very few select folks within the organization that are actually really going to move the needle for your sales cycle. So you can imagine,
Mhm.
if you just send them 100 emails, like they're just you're going to do the exact opposite of what you want to do. Like you're
Yeah.
much better off targeting them with like very specific personalized outreach, and making sure that you can speak to like their specific needs, what's going on in the market, all the public information that they may be sharing, and making sure that you can really kind of put your best foot forward with a couple folks that are really going to move the needle for your sale. So yeah, those are kind of the two different schools of thought, and I do think like it really is dependent on your company, your strategy, what product you're selling, who you're selling to. But yeah, those are kind of the two different ways in which I would think about it.
Right. So I came across this post the other day on LinkedIn where where this guy was practically begging people to not cold call him anymore. Do you think
Mhm.
cold calling still works though? Do you
Uh,
think in any like under any scenario it could work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I answered a cold call a week ago, and I'm in the process of purchasing their product. So, it's but it's hit or miss. I mean, that was probably one out of 100 times that I've gotten it, and they got really lucky, and I picked up at the right time, and it was actually a problem that we were looking for. Um,
Mhm.
I think if you're going to deploy that type of a tactic, like yeah, I mean, one, just like any type of prospecting, like the hit rate is going to be minimal. So your expectations have to be set like from the beginning that you're likely talking a fraction of a percent that are actually going to convert. Um, the other thing too is like, there is definitely an art to the cold call, where
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're calling at the right time. You want to make sure that you're front loading your entire message and the value proposition, because if you get somebody on the phone, and you're lucky enough to have them answer, and then you take 10 20 15 like 30 seconds to like just do a basic introduction, you've already lost my attention.
That's utter
um,
chaos then. Yeah.
so yeah,
Yeah.
I still think, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a right time and a place. It's something that I think some of the best SDRs, like sales development reps, will definitely experiment with like a
Mhm.
cadence where you can like email
Mhm.
them, reach out on LinkedIn, call them. For each individual buyer, the same person might respond. One person might respond on LinkedIn because they prefer responding there, but another person might respond via phone call. Another person might respond via email. It's something that's definitely worth testing. And I think so you'd be surprised at sometimes the results.
Right. Um, so I actually saw Adam that you host a podcast as well, right? So how
That's
has that
correct. Yep.
experience been for you? I'm
Yeah.
really curious to know because this has been quite an interesting experience for me. So maybe so how's that been for you?
Yeah, it's been awesome. I mean, we just posted our 80th episode. So I host a podcast called the Partnered Podcast. We
Mhm.
describe best practices on how to close more deals with your partner ecosystem network. And we speak with some of the world's best SaaS leaders. So I've been doing it now for I think a little bit over a year and a half, and it's been really awesome. I mean, both for my own personal learning, but also being able to basically just share the stories of a lot of folks in the SaaS market who are just really doing a great job at this ecosystem sales approach, or using their sales network to their
Yeah.
advantage. So yeah, I've really come to enjoy it, and I think it's podcasts are just a great forum for you to learn personally, but also
Yes.
for
Yeah.
quickly digestible for folks to really kind of could get a lot of information very quickly.
That's true. So like was this in the pipeline since a very long time or was this like one of those um quarantine or stuck at home ideas that kind of popped up out of like
Yeah,
sheer boredom?
good
how
question. It
how
was
did you
probably
decide?
Probably an equal combination of both. It was something that I definitely wanted to do for quite some time. I know that the world of partnerships is like extremely opaque, and there's like every company partners and different ways. So, I knew that it was a good opportunity for us. We are sponsored by an organization called Partnership Leaders, which, if your listeners haven't checked it out, definitely should. It's one of the fastest growing partnership communities out there, and my kind of goal with the podcast was to just illuminate people that are doing this very well and just share best practices so that the entire role of partnership leaders can be moved forward. I think way too often partnerships are kind of viewed as like the stepchild, if you will, rather than like an actual huge part of the organization that can really drive benefits across sales, across marketing, across products. So
Yep.
the podcast is just my way of kind of making one step in that direction, but there's a lot of awesome work being done in the space by now, partnership leaders included.
Yeah, so it's so I'm gonna end on another funny story. We've been doing this podcast for quite a while now, but like suddenly when within like the past year or so, like more and more people were like all of a sudden interested in being part of it, and then and then at first it was like maybe they really do like listening to us, maybe everybody's enjoying our podcast all of a sudden, but then there came a point when we realized that maybe it's because people are at home and they have nothing to do, and maybe that is why everybody's now all of a sudden willing to jump on an episode with us. But yeah, it's been a win-win situation for us, because we've actually been able to talk to some really really good people, which I feel like would not have been possible otherwise. So yeah, I had a really good time, Adam. I think I should end it because I have like my team has given me like sharp 20 or maximum 30-minute time limit to end the podcast and not annoy guests any further.
Cool.
Thank you so much for being part of Founders Grit, and I'll definitely keep in touch. We can also like maybe do a few more episodes, because I can see that you're like really passionate about what you do, and I'm sure you have like a lot of knowledge and a lot of wisdom to share. So I'd love to hear more about it as well.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care, and we'll definitely keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adam.